The colony ship had been drifting for 3 days when the Valkyrie warship surrounded it. And by the time the humans realized what was happening, it was already too late for them to escape or fight back. Commander Zethral stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the primitive human vessel with cold satisfaction, his scaled face showing no emotion as his officers reported that the humans had surrendered without firing a single shot. "Weak creatures," he said to his second in command. "They do not even have the honor to die fighting." The Valkyrie were a proud species who had conquered dozens of worlds across the galaxy, and they measured the worth of other races by their strength in battle and their willingness to shed blood for glory. Humans, in their estimation, were nothing more than soft-skinned prey animals who had somehow stumbled into space travel without earning the right to be there within hours. The Valkyrie soldiers had boarded the colony ship and rounded up to 300 human survivors, separating them into groups based on their potential usefulness as slaves or laborers. Among the prisoners was a 7-year-old girl named Lily Morgan, who had watched her parents die during the initial attack when a Valkyrie boarding pod had torn through the hull of the family quarters. She had not spoken a word since that moment, and she clung to the hand of Dr. Nathan Cole, a scientist who had found her hiding beneath a collapsed bulkhead and had refused to leave her behind. Nathan was a tall man in his 40s with kind eyes and gentle hands, and though he had no children of his own, something about this silent little girl with her tear-streaked face had awakened a fierce protective instinct in his heart. "Stay close to ma'am," he whispered to her as the Valkyrie guards marched them through the corridors of the alien ship. "I will not let anything happen to you. I promise." Lily looked up at him with eyes that seemed far too old for her young face, and she squeezed his hand tighter but said nothing in return. The Valkyrie capital world was called Valthoria, a harsh planet of black mountains and red skies, where the ruling empire had built their civilization on the backs of conquered species. At the heart of the capital city stood the Temple of Sacred Flame, where the Valkyrie kept their most prized possessions, the Kyrvith, massive dragon-like creatures that they worshipped as gods of war and destruction. These beasts were ancient beyond measure, with armored scales that could withstand plasma fire and breath that burned hotter than the core of a dying star. The Valkyrie had used them for centuries to terrorize their enemies and cement their dominance over the galaxy. And every major military campaign began with a sacred ritual to honor the Elder. Kyrvith Commander Zethral had been planning the invasion of a wealthy trading alliance for months, and now that he had captured these pathetic humans, he saw an opportunity to combine practical matters with religious obligation. "The ritual requires a living sacrifice," he announced to the assembled priests and military officers, "and I believe these humans will serve that purpose admirably." The High Priestess Velmora, an ancient female Valkyrie with faded scales and knowing eyes, studied the human prisoners with an expression that might have been curiosity. "Which one will you offer to the Elder?" she asked. Jethro walked slowly along the line of terrified humans until he stopped in front of Nathan and Lily, and a cruel smile spread across his reptilian face. "This one," he said, pointing at the little girl. "A child will make the perfect sacrifice, for it will demonstrate to the Kyrvith how weak and worthless these creatures truly are." Nathan stepped forward immediately, placing himself between Lily and the commander. "No," he said, his voice shaking but determined. "Take me instead. I am begging you. She's just a child who has already lost everything." Jethro backhanded him across the face with enough force to send him sprawling to the floor, and 2 guards seized his arms before he could rise again. "Your protests mean nothing, human," the commander said. "The choice has been made." Lily watched as Nathan struggled against the guards, screaming her name and fighting with every ounce of strength he possessed. But the Valkyrie were far stronger than any human, and they held him easily. She did not cry or scream as they led her away from the only person in the universe who still cared whether she lived or died, she simply walked between her captors with her head down and her small hands trembling at her sides. And anyone watching might have thought she had already accepted her fate. The sacred chamber was located deep beneath the temple, carved from black stone that absorbed all light and radiated an ancient cold that seemed to seep into the bones. Torches lined the walls, but their flames seemed diminished in this place, as if even fire feared what dwelt in the darkness beyond. Two massive doors of carved metal stood at the far end of the chamber, covered in symbols and images depicting the glory of the Kairavith throughout Valkyrie history. Beyond those doors lies the Elder, one of the priests explained, though Lily did not understand his language and would not have cared, even if she did. It is called Ashmain, and it has lived for 300 years. And it has devoured 10,000 sacrifices in that time. The priests performed their rituals, chanting words of power and burning incense that smelled of copper and ash. When they finished, the great doors began to open with a sound like thunder rolling through mountains, and a wave of heat washed over Lily that made her skin prickle and her eyes water. "Go now," the lead priest commanded, pushing her forward, "and die with honor if you are capable of such a thing." Lily stumbled through the doorway and heard the doors slam shut behind her with terrible finality. She stood alone in a cavern, so vast that she could not see the ceiling or the far walls, lit only by veins of glowing red minerals that pulsed like living arteries through the stone. Somewhere in that darkness, something enormous was breathing. She could feel the rhythm of it in the floor beneath her feet, could hear the rush of air like wind through a canyon. And she knew with absolute certainty that she was not alone. A pair of eyes opened in the shadows, burning orange like twin suns, each one larger than her entire body. The elder Kairavith called Ashmain had awakened, and it was looking directly at her above in the observation room. Commander Zethral and his officers watched through specially designed screens that could penetrate the darkness of the sacred chamber. "Watch closely," the commander said with satisfaction. "This will be over quickly." But he was wrong about that. And before the night was finished, everything he believed about humans and dragons and the nature of strength itself would be proven catastrophically incorrect. Lily stood frozen in the darkness as those burning orange eyes moved closer, and the ground beneath her feet trembled with each step the massive creature took toward her. The glow from the mineral veins in the walls provided just enough light for her to see the shape emerging from the shadows. And what she saw was something that belonged in nightmares rather than real. Ashmain was enormous beyond anything she could have imagined, with a body that stretched at least 60 feet from its horned head to the tip of its armored tail. Its scales were the color of volcanic rock, black and gray with streaks of deep red that seemed to pulse with inner heat. And each scale was larger than the shields the Valkyrie soldiers carried. The creature's head alone was bigger than the transport vehicle that had brought her family to the colony ship all those months ago. And its teeth, curved like swords forged from bone and darkness wings, folded against its sides like massive curtains of leather and scale. And when it breathed, smoke curled from nostrils that could have swallowed her whole without effort. Any normal person would have run screaming toward the doors and pounded on them until their hands bled, begging for mercy from the Valkyrie who had sent them to this death. But Lily was not a normal person anymore. Not after everything she had lost and everything she had seen. She was empty inside, hollowed out by grief and exhaustion and the simple acceptance that comes when a person has nothing left to lose. So, instead of running or screaming, she did something that confused both the dragon and the Valkyrie watching from above. She sat down on the cold stone floor, wrapped her arms around her knees, and began to cry out loud, desperate sobs, but quiet tears that rolled down her cheeks and dripped onto the stone. The kind of tears that come when sadness is too deep for sound. In the observation room, Commander Zethral leaned forward with a frown on his scaled face. "What is it doing?" he demanded. "Why does it not flee?" No one had an answer for him, because no sacrifice had ever behaved this way before a Yashmane stopped its approach and tilted its massive head to one side. Studying this tiny creature that sat weeping on the floor of its den, the dragon had killed thousands of offerings over its long life, and they had all reacted the same way, with terror and desperation and futile attempts to escape or fight. This one was different. And the difference made the ancient beast curious in a way it had not felt for many decades, slowly, with movements that seemed almost gentle for something so massive. Ashmane lowered its head until its snout was only a few feet away from the crying child. Hot breath washed over Lily, carrying the smell of smoke and something else. Something almost sweet like burning wood on a winter night. She looked up through her tears and found herself staring directly into one of those enormous orange eyes. And in that eye she saw something that surprised her intelligence. Deep and ancient and far more complex than the Velthari had ever suspected. The Kairvith were not simple beasts, driven by hunger and instinct, as their masters believed them to be. They were thinking creatures with minds and memories that stretched back centuries. And they had simply never found a reason to reveal this truth to the cold-blooded conquerors who thought they controlled the Mashmang. Could feel something radiating from this small being. Something warm and bright that called to senses the Velthari did not even know existed. The Kairveth were empaths, capable of reading and sharing emotions with other living creatures. And this ability had once allowed them to form deep bonds with a species that had lived on their homeworld long ago. That species had been warm and kind and full of love. And when they had been wiped out by a cosmic catastrophe, thousands of years before the Velthari rose to power, the Kairvith had mourned them in silence ever since now. For the first time since that ancient loss, Ashmane sensed that same warmth coming from the tiny creature before it. The dragon felt the child's grief, her loneliness, her desperate wish to see her mother and father again. And something stirred in its ancient heart that had been sleeping for millennia. "I miss my mom," Lily whispered, not knowing if the creature could understand her words, but needing to say them anyway. "I miss my dad too, and I just want to go home." But there is no home anymore. Ashmane made a sound deep in its throat. Not a growl or a roar, but something softer. Something that might have been sympathy if dragons could feel such things. And then, to the absolute shock of everyone watching from above, Lily reached out her small hand and placed it on the dragon's snout. Her fingers touched scales that should have been burning hot, but instead felt warm and almost soft. And Ashmane closed its enormous eyes and leaned into her touch like a cat seeking comfort from a gentle hand. "The child touches the elder," one of the priests gasped. "This has never happened before in all our recorded history." Commander Zethral's frown deepened into something closer to anger. "This is unacceptable," he growled. "The sacrifice must be completed. Send soldiers to finish what the beast apparently cannot." High Priestess Valmora held up a hand to stop him. "Wait," she said, her old eyes narrowing as she watched the scene below. "I want to see what happens next." In the cavern, Ashmane had begun to move again. But not to attack. The dragon slowly curled its massive body around Lily like a wall of living armor, its tail wrapping protectively behind her and its wing extending over her head like a shelter from the cold. Lily found herself surrounded by warmth and the steady rhythm of the dragon's heartbeat. And for the first time since her parents died, she felt something other than despair. She felt safe. "You are warm," she said softly, pressing her cheek against the dragon's scales. "You are not a monster at all, are you? You are just lonely like me." Ashmane rumbled in response, and if dragons could smile, this one surely would have. Commander Zethral had seen enough. and he was not willing to let some spiritual nonsense interfere with his military ambitions. "Open the doors," he commanded. "Send in a squad of warriors to retrieve the sacrifice and complete the ritual by force if necessary." The priests hesitated, but the soldiers did not. And within moments, the great metal doors began to grind open once more. 10 Velthari warriors in full combat armor marched into the cavern, their weapons drawn and their faces set with grim determination. "Surrender the offering," their leader called out to the dragon, "or face the consequences of defying the Empire." Ashmane raised its head and looked at the soldiers with eyes that had suddenly changed from curious and gentle to something far more dangerous. The dragon had tolerated the Velthari for centuries because they provided food and shelter and asked little in return except occasional violence, which suited a predator's nature well enough. But now they were threatening something the dragon had chosen to protect, something precious and warm and worth more than all the sacrifices they had ever offered. Ashmane opened its mouth and released a roar that shook the walls of the cavern and sent cracks racing through solid stone. Then it breathed fire. Flames that erupted from the dragon's throat were not the controlled burst the Velthari had seen in battle, but something far more intense and terrifying. The soldiers barely had time to raise their shields before the inferno engulfed them, driving them back toward the doors with their armor glowing red from the heat. "Fall back," the squad leader screamed. "Fall back now." They fled through the doors and the heavy metal slammed shut behind them, leaving scorch marks on the sacred carvings that had stood unmarred for centuries in the observation room. There was only silence as the Velthari leadership stared at the screens in disbelief. Ashmane had curled protectively around the human child once more, and its message was absolutely clear to everyone watching. The dragon would not allow anyone to harm this girl, and anyone who tried would burn. Hours passed in the sacred cavern beneath the Temple of Sacred Flame, and during that time, something remarkable continued to develop between the ancient dragon and the human child. Lily had fallen asleep against Ashmane's side, exhausted from grief and fear and the overwhelming strangeness of everything that had happened to her since the Velthari attacked her home. The dragon remained awake, watching over her with those burning orange eyes that now held a gentleness no Velthari had ever witnessed. Every few minutes, Ashmane would lower its massive head and breathe warm air over the sleeping girl, keeping her comfortable in the cold stone chamber above in the observation room. The Velthari leadership had been arguing for hours about what to do. Commander Zethral wanted to send in heavy assault troops with plasma cannons, capable of killing even a Kyrvith. But High Priestess Velmora had forbidden any further attacks until she could consult the ancient texts. "The Elder has never bonded with a sacrifice before," she said, her old voice filled with wonder and concern. "There must be a reason, and we must understand it before we act. The reason is that we have fed it too well and made it soft." Zethral snarled. "It has forgotten its purpose and its duty to the Empire. You understand nothing of the Kyrvith." The High Priestess replied sharply. "You see them only as weapons, but they are far more than that." She retreated to the temple archives, leaving the commander fuming in the observation room while his aides tried to develop alternative plans in the prison section of the capital. Word had already begun to spread among the human captives about what had happened in the sacred chamber. Dr. Nathan Cole had spent the night pacing in his cell, torn apart by guilt and despair over his failure to protect Lily, when a sympathetic guard mentioned that the sacrifice had not been killed, that the dragon had actually protected the child from the soldiers. Nathan felt his legs give out beneath him, and he sank to the floor with tears of relief streaming down his face. "She is alive," he whispered to himself. "Somehow she is still alive." In a nearby cell, a man named Captain Danny Webb had also heard the news. and his mind was already working on how to use this unexpected development. Danny had been a military pilot before the colony ship was captured, a veteran of several skirmishes with hostile alien species who had learned to look for opportunities in even the darkest situations. "If the dragon has turned against its masters," he said quietly to the prisoners gathered at the bars of their cells, "then maybe we have a chance here. Maybe we can find a way out of this." The other humans listened with desperate hope as Danny began to outline the beginnings of a plan back in the sacred cavern. Lily had woken from her sleep and was now sitting cross-legged on the ground, having a one-sided conversation with Ashmain. "My favorite color is purple," she said, looking up at the dragon's enormous face. "And my favorite food is macaroni and cheese. But I do not think they have that here," Ashmain rumbled softly in response. And though the dragon could not speak human languages, something was passing between them that went beyond words. The Kairveth's empathic abilities allowed it to understand the emotions behind Lily's words, the meaning beneath the sounds, and in return the dragon projected feelings of warmth and protection that Lily somehow understood without needing to hear them spoken. "You are my friend now," Lily declared with the simple certainty of a child. "And friends take care of each other. That is what my mom always said." The dragon lowered its head until its snout touched Lily's outstretched hands, and a pulse of warmth passed between them that made the little girl giggle for the first time. Since her parents had died, something fundamental was changing in the Temple of Sacred Flame, something that would soon spread far beyond its walls in the archives. High Priestess Velmora had found what she was looking for, and what she read in those ancient texts filled her with a mixture of awe and dread. The scrolls spoke of a time before the Velthri Empire, when the Kairveth had lived in harmony with another species on their shared homeworld. This other race had been called the Kindred, and they were described as warm-blooded beings who radiated emotional energy that the Kairveth found irresistible. The two species had formed bonds deeper than friendship or partnership, connections that joined their minds and hearts in ways that made both stronger when the kindred were destroyed by a great calamity. The Kairveth had fallen into a grief so profound that they withdrew from all connection with other beings. The Velthri had found them in this diminished state and had mistaken their withdrawal for simplicity, their grief for mindlessness. "They have been waiting," Velmora whispered as she read the final passages, "waiting all these thousands of years for the kindred to return. And now, somehow, against all probability, they may have found something close enough. The humans, with their warm blood and their emotional depth and their capacity for love and connection, were not the same as the lost kindred, but they were similar enough to awaken something in the Kairveth that had been sleeping since before the Velthri ancestors first crawled from their spawning pools." The High Priestess made her way to the observation room with the scrolls clutched in her hands and a decision forming in her ancient mind. "Commander," she said as she entered, "I must speak with you about what I have discovered." But Zethral had grown tired of waiting for permission and wisdom, and he had already set a plan in motion. "I have dispatched assault teams to the other Kairveth holdings," he announced without looking at her. "We will bring the beast to heel before this contamination can spread." Velmora felt a chill run through her scales that had nothing to do with the temperature. "What have you done?" she demanded before he could answer. Alarms began to sound throughout the temple. Reports flooded in from across the city. The Kairveth were behaving strangely, refusing commands, turning away from their handlers and looking toward the temple with something that might have been longing in their burning eyes at the human prison facility. The dragons assigned to guard the perimeter had stopped patrolling and had instead gathered near the cells where the captives were held. They were not threatening the humans but studying them, sniffing the air around them and making soft sounds that the Velthri guards had never heard before. One of the younger dragons, barely half the size of Ashmain, but still massive by any standard, had pressed its head against the bars of Nathan Cole's cell and was staring at him with unmistakable curiosity. "I think they can sense her," Nathan breathed, understanding dawning in his eyes. "I think they can feel what Lily feels, and they want what she has found." Captain Danny Webb watched the dragons with a growing smile on his weathered face. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said to his fellow prisoners, "I believe our situation has just improved significantly." In the sacred cavern, Lily had climbed onto Ashmane's back and was sitting between the dragon's shoulder blades, her small hands gripping the edges of massive scales for balance. "I can see everything from up here," she called out happily. "You are so tall. This is amazing." Ashmane turned its head to look at the child on its back. And if dragons could feel joy, then this one surely felt it now for the first time in 3,000 years. A Kyrvith had found a companion worth protecting, and across the planet, every other Kyrvith could feel it too. The capital city of the Velthari Empire had descended into chaos within hours of Lily's bond with Ashmane, and no amount of military force seemed capable of restoring order. Commander Zethro stood in the central command center, watching reports flood in from every district with growing fury and disbelief. Kyrvith had stopped obeying their handlers entirely, and several had broken free from their containment facilities and were now roaming the streets, without any apparent purpose except to search for something. "They are moving toward the human holding areas," one of his officers reported. "We have lost contact with 3 guard posts in the past hour." "Then send more troops," Zethro commanded. "Surround the prison complex and shoot any dragon that approaches." High Priestess Velmora entered the command center with her ancient scrolls still in hand and a look of grim determination on her weathered face. "You cannot stop this by force," she said. "The bond that is formed between the elder and the human child has awakened something in all the Kyrvith, something that has been dormant since before our empire existed. Speak plainly." "Priestess," the commander growled. "The Kyrvith are seeking companionship," Velmora explained. "They are reaching out to the humans because they sense in them the same qualities that once connected them to the kindred, the lost species they mourned for millennia." "Then we will kill every human on this planet," Zethro declared. "We will eliminate the source of this contamination and bring our sacred beasts back under control. If you do that, the Kyrvith will turn on us completely," the High Priestess warned. "They will burn this city to ash and everyone in it, including you." Before the commander could respond, an explosion rocked the building and the lights flickered as emergency power systems activated. "Report," Zethro shouted. "What was that?" "The prison complex," an officer called back. 3 Kyrvith have breached the outer walls and are inside the facility, at the prison. Captain Danny Webb had been waiting for exactly this moment when the first dragon crashed through the reinforced gate, scattering Velthari guards like leaves in a windstorm. Danny was already rallying his fellow prisoners. "Everyone stay calm," he called out over the screams and confusion. "These dragons are not here to hurt us. They are here to help." Dr. Nathan Cole pushed his way to the front of the crowd, his eyes fixed on the massive creature that was now tearing the bars from the cell doors with its powerful jaws. "Lily," he said to the dragon, hoping against hope that somehow his words might reach her through this incredible connection. "Lily, if you can feel this, we're coming for you." The dragon paused and turned its burning gaze on Nathan, and something passed between them that he could not explain but could certainly feel a sense of recognition, of purpose, of a child's voice asking for help through means that had no words. "She heard me," Nathan breathed. Somehow she heard me. The dragons worked with surprising coordination, freeing the human prisoners from their cells, while simultaneously fighting off the Velthari soldiers who tried to intervene. The beasts seemed to understand exactly which beings to protect and which to drive away. and their flames and claws made short work of anyone who threatened their new charges. "We need to reach the temple," Danny announced as the prisoners gathered in the courtyard. "That is where they are keeping the girl, and she is the key to all of this." "How do you know that?" one of the other prisoners asked. "Because the dragons are telling us," Nathan answered. And he pointed to the largest of the three Kairvath, which had lowered itself to the ground and was clearly waiting for someone to climb onto its back. Danny looked at the dragon, then at Nathan, then at the terrified but hopeful faces of the humans around him. "Well," he said with a grim smile, "I always wanted to ride a dragon across the city." Similar scenes were playing out at every location where humans were being held. The Kairvath had broken free from every facility, every stable, every military outpost where they had been kept, and they were all moving with single-minded purpose toward the human prisoners. Some of the beasts carried humans on their backs as they flew toward the Temple of Sacred Flame, while others ran through the streets and demolished any Veltari forces that stood in their way. Commander Zethral watched his empire crumbling on the screens before him and felt something he had never experienced in his long military career: fear. Genuine and terrible fear, not of death but of irrelevance. "This cannot be happening," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "We are the masters here. We are the conquerors. We were never masters," High Priestess Velmora said quietly. "We were tolerated, nothing more. And now our guests have finally found a reason to ask us to leave." The commander's fear transformed into rage, and he drew his ceremonial blade with murder in his eyes. "If I cannot control the beasts, then I will kill the source of this infection myself," he declared. "I will go to the sacred chamber and cut that human child's throat with my own hands." He stormed out of the command center before anyone could stop him, gathering his personal guard as he went in the sacred cavern. Lily had felt the changes happening across the planet through her connection with Ashmain, and she understood in a simple childlike way that something wonderful and terrible was unfolding because of her. "Your friends are waking up," she said to the dragon. "They were sleeping for a really long time, but now they are remembering how to feel things again." Ashmain rumbled in agreement and rose to its full height, its ancient body suddenly alive with purpose and power. The dragon could sense the other Kairvath approaching, could feel their joy and their hope and their desperate desire to find what Ashmain had found, but it could also sense something else, something cold and hateful coming closer with every passing moment. "Someone bad is coming," Lily said, and there was no fear in her voice because she trusted her friend to protect her. "Someone who wants to hurt me." Ashmain's eyes narrowed and smoke began to curl from its nostrils. Great metal doors of the sacred chamber began to grind open, and Commander Zethral stepped through with his blade drawn and his guard at his back. "Step away from the beast, child," he commanded. "Your death will end this madness and restore order to my empire." Lily looked down at him from her perch on Ashmain's back and shook her head slowly. "No," she said simply. "You are the bad one here, not us." The commander roared and charged forward, but he never reached his target. Ashmain's tail swept across the chamber like a battering ram, catching Zethral in the chest and sending him crashing into the far wall with a sound of breaking bones. His guards raised their weapons, but before they could fire, the ceiling above them exploded inward, and three more Kairvath descended into the chamber on the back of the largest sat Dr. Nathan Cole and Captain Danny Webb. And behind them came dozens of human prisoners who had ridden the dragons all the way from the prison complex. "Lily," Nathan shouted, tears streaming down his face. "Lily, I found you." The little girl's face lit up with a joy that spread through the empathic network connecting all the Kairvath across the planet. "Dr. Cole," she cried out, "I made a friend. I made the best friend ever." The dragons roared in unison, a sound that shook the foundations of the temple, and could be heard in every corner of the capital city. The Valkyrie Empire had just discovered what happened when you underestimated the power of a human child's heart. The battle for the Valkyrie capital lasted 3 days. Though calling it a battle was perhaps too generous a term for what actually occurred, the Kyrvith had chosen their side. And against dragons that numbered in the hundreds, the military might of the Empire crumbled like dry leaves in a hurricane. Commander Zethro had survived his encounter in the sacred chamber, though barely, and from his medical bed, he continued to issue orders that no one obeyed and threats that no one feared. His personal war dragon, a beast he had ridden into a dozen conquests, had been one of the first to turn against him when the awakening spread through the Kyrvith collective. The creature had stood over his broken body in the temple and simply looked at him with those burning eyes. And in that gaze the commander had seen exactly what he had always been to the dragon: nothing but a parasite clinging to power he had never earned. High Priestess Valmora had been wiser than her military counterpart, and she had surrendered herself to the humans and their dragon. Allies within hours of the uprising beginning, I offer no excuses for what our empire has done, she said to Captain Danny Webb and the Council of Human Survivors. I can only offer my knowledge and my willingness to help make things right. Danny had been skeptical at first, but Dr. Nathan Cole had argued for accepting her aid. We need someone who understands this world and its people, Nathan said, and she seems genuinely willing to help, which is more than I can say for most of the Valkyrie we have encountered. The negotiations that followed were unlike anything either species had experienced before. The humans had no army and no weapons beyond what they could salvage from fallen Valkyrie soldiers. But they had something far more powerful. They had the Kyrvith. Every dragon on the planet had gravitated toward the humans like flowers turning toward the sun, drawn by the emotional warmth that their species had been starving for across thousands of lonely years. Lily sat at the center of every meeting, perched on Ashmane's back or held in the dragon's protective coil, and her presence seemed to calm both the humans and the Kyrvith whenever tensions rose. The dragons trust her, Danny observed during one of the council sessions. And honestly, so do I. There is something about that kid that makes you believe everything will work out. Nathan smiled and nodded, watching his adopted daughter laugh as she played with a group of younger Kyrvith who had gathered around her like puppies seeking attention. She's been through things that would break most adults, he said. But instead of letting it destroy her, she found a way to reach out and connect with something that everyone else saw as a monster. The terms of peace were simple but absolute. The humans would be given ships to leave the Valkyrie world and return to human space, along with supplies and star charts to help them find their way. Any Kyrvith who wished to accompany their new human companions would be free to do so, and the Valkyrie would make no attempt to stop them or reclaim them in exchange. The humans would not seek revenge or call for military strikes against the Valkyrie Empire, though Nathan made it very clear that humanity would be watching them closely from now on. Your people built your power on the backs of others, he told High Priestess Valmora during the final negotiations. On slaves and sacrifices and creatures you never bothered to understand. Maybe now you will have to learn how to build something that lasts without those foundations. The old priestess bowed her head in acceptance. Perhaps this is the judgment we have earned, she said. And perhaps it is also the opportunity we need to become something better than we have been. On the day of departure, 3 human ships lifted off from the Valkyrie capital, carrying all the surviving colonists plus the knowledge and resources they would need to start again somewhere. Safe, but they did not travel alone. 47 Kyrvith had chosen to bond with human companions and follow them into the stars, including Ashmane, who would never be parted from Lily as long as either of them lived. The dragons flew in formation around the human vessels, their massive wings somehow carrying them through the void of space as easily as they had carried them through planetary atmosphere. Scientists in later years would spend decades trying to understand how this was possible, and most would eventually conclude that the Kyrveth existed on a level of biology and physics that humans were only beginning to comprehend. Lily stood at the observation window of the lead ship, her small hand pressed against the glass as she watched Ashmain glide through the stars beside her. "We're going to find a new home," she said to Nathan, who stood beside her with one hand on her shoulder. "A place where everyone can be together and nobody has to be afraid anymore." "I think we will," Nathan agreed. "And I think you are going to help us build it." The little girl smiled. And across the empathic network that connected all the bonded pairs, every Kyrveth felt that smile-like warmth spreading through cold spaceward of what had happened on Velthoria spread through the galaxy faster than the human ships could travel. And by the time they reached safe harbor in human territory, they found a very different reception than they had expected. Not fear or suspicion or military quarantine, but wonder and celebration, and thousands of people who wanted to meet the humans who had befriended dragons. Lily became famous across dozens of worlds, not because she had sought attention, but because her story resonated with something deep in the hearts of every species that heard it. Here was proof that strength was not measured in weapons or armies or conquest. Here was proof that even the fiercest creature in the universe could be reached by kindness and compassion, and the simple, innocent trust of a child. Years later, when Lily had grown into a young woman and become the official ambassador between humanity and Kyrveth, she would often be asked to tell her story to new audiences, and she would always end it the same way. "The Velthari thought they were feeding me to a monster," she would say, "but what they were really doing was introducing me to my best friend in the whole universe." Then she would gesture to Ashmain, still massive and magnificent despite the decades that had passed, and the dragon would lower its enormous head so that Lily could place her hand on its snout, just as she had done in that dark cavern so long ago. "They wanted to show how weak humans were," she would continue, "but instead they showed everyone, including themselves, what real strength looks like. It looks like connection, like understanding, like choosing to reach out instead of running away. It looks like love." And every time she said those words, every Kyrveth in range would raise their heads and roar in agreement, and the sound would echo across whatever world or station hosted them. A reminder to all who heard it that the universe was far stranger and more wonderful than anyone had imagined. That the Velthari had fed a human child to their fiercest dragon, expecting a quick death and a demonstration of power. What they got instead was a revolution, an awakening, and a friendship that would reshape the galaxy for generations to come. And nobody who witnessed it ever forgot the lesson it taught them about the unexpected strength of the human heart.